Ahoy, mateys, and welcome back to Captain Keaton. I'm joined today by none other than Spencer of RPG Archive, who I will interview on his experience growing up with and alongside The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Welcome, Spencer of RPG Archive.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure watching the channel grow. I'm glad there's a game I can finally talk about. This is exciting.
Yeah, man. I've just a little sneak peek for the viewers. You know, I've kind of bounced a lot of ideas off of Spencer, just even in terms of the channel concept and thumbnails. So, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it wasn't built by one person either. So here's one of the architects of Captain Keaton.
Oh my, I cannot be called an architect. That's way too much credit, but thank you.
Well, if anything, you know, you've done some of the voiceover work for some of the retrospectives. How's that been going?
I don't know what you're talking about. I never did. I never did any
Sure you didn't.
voice
Okay.
work. I definitely didn't do an impression of Miyamoto. That's for sure.
Well, it wasn't poorly received. So before I really get into it, I just kind of want to explain to the viewers what we do here on Captain Keaton, seeing as how my audience size has almost tripled since last Friday. What we do over here is get perspective to give perspective. I want to know what it was like for others to grow up alongside The Legend of Zelda as a series and individual entries. I didn't grow up with several of the entries, and even if I did, your experience isn't my experience. And so I think it's important to bring in a range of perspective when thinking about The Legend of Zelda. So, before we get into what your perspective is with A Link to the Past, I just want you to tell the viewers what is your perspectives here on YouTube. What do you do over on RPG Archive?
Well, on RPG Archive, I play a lot of RPGs specifically, and you've played most of the RPGs that I played on that channel with me, and we've talked about them at probably nauseating length. They're usually like 2 to 3 hours. Dragon Quest XI was a little bit longer than that, but yeah, we talk about RPGs and go deep into them, into their history, into the making of the games, and then we talk about the games themselves and what our opinions are in our journeys through them. So if you like RPGs, hit me up.
Cool. Yeah. I do happen to like RPGs, and Zelda is one of them. So I know that might be a contentious statement, but hey,
Ain't gonna be on my channel. We'll do all the Zelda stuff. Will go on your channel. That's the RPG for your channel.
it works for me. And then of course there is the button mappers.
Yeah, we're on the button mappers with our buddy Alex. We tear it up. It's as of recording, it's Junky July, which should just be Crappy July, but we can't call it that. So Junky July, the algorithm, and then and then we'll have another month coming up that we haven't released the game talk or the game talk for, so we can't even say. Right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, cheeky. I like it.
Okay, well, let's get into the Zelda. And I'm not talking about the princess. So, Spencer, I want to rephrase the question I've been asking people who've been coming on for the first time. I think it accomplishes the same goals, but when it comes to your memories with The Legend of Zelda, what are your first memories or one of your strongest, earliest memories?
Of just Zelda entirely as a series?
Sure. Like, do you have a particular moment that you remember when you were like first exposed to an entry in the series or the series altogether? What are some of your earliest memories?
Sure. My friend had it, and he had an NES, and I've never had a. And we're talking about the first one. I never had an NES. We grew up pretty poor, so we didn't have any consoles until the Super Nintendo. Uh, I looked at it. I kind of admired the gold cartridge. I think a lot of people on this channel said that. They're just like the gold cartridge really stood out. And I mean, at the time it did. There wasn't anything really like it. And you go, what is that game? And they're like, it's Zelda. And then I saw them play it. I don't know that I was really blown away by what I saw. I was curious, but I was actually probably more interested in games like Mega Man and like licensed games at the time. Like I think they had a Bart Simpson game, so it was like all about that, even though it was garbage. Um, but yeah, I just was in the back of my head that there was a series called Zelda. It was pretty popular, and I had no idea what the hell it was about. that's that's my earliest memory of it. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool though. At least you have kind of tangible memories with that original game. You know, it's before my time, so it's interesting.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind, I'm 88. I was born in 88. So this would have been probably around the time that the game we're talking about today was released, because I was probably 4 or 5. Those are the earliest memories I can have, so they're probably around that age.
Were there other games in your life at that time, like that you had as a point of comparison?
I think I got a Super Nintendo for my 5th or 6th birthday. And with that, we had Super Mario World. So when I saw my friend playing NES games, I looked at it more as a novelty, but I was like, Super Mario World looks and sounds better than every one of these games. So it's not even like these games aren't really in my radar, but they're just kind of interesting to look at them and be like, that's weird. Why are you playing this and not a Super Nintendo? It was bizarre to me. We were pretty poor, so we didn't really have a lot of games. I'm trying to think if we had any others for a long time. I think it was just that, and then we just go to Blockbuster and try out games that are hit and miss.
So, like, were you really into Super Mario World then?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I beat that game inside and out, all the bonus stages, which were hard for me as a child. I mean, I was not good at video games, but you know, we had the one weapon that I don't have now, which is time. And me and my brother, because I'm a twin, we would trade off on that game and just destroy it and you know, cheer each other on. It was, you know, playing games when you're a twin, it's a completely different experience because it's a shared, almost like a sport, but you're on the same team because we didn't play any competitive games against each other. So it was just always like cheering each other on and celebrating when we won. So I mean, it's a treasure that I don't think a lot of people have, because they're usually their brothers, if they have them, are in different times and they're not quite on the same level.
Do you miss it?
Yes, yes. Um, we had a lot of really good memories. Rarely we didn't really fight a lot, but we definitely didn't fight when we played video games. We were just very supportive of each other, and they're really good memories. Now I don't think the only game he plays is he played Overwatch for a little bit, and he plays some mobile games. So we're not linking up in that space anymore.
Do you
Yeah.
have a particular memory or a story of one time you guys were like cheering each other on when playing a game together?
Um, yes, it's a Super Bomberman 2. It's either that one or 3. I can't remember the numbers, but it had a multiplayer mode, so like you could go through the entire story, but in co-op, which was perfect for us. And I loved it. I loved the art. I loved the craziness that was going on in that game. And we would play it together, and we got pretty far in it. I know we rented it. So we were milking what we could out of it. And I think I died and we were out of lives, so it was up to my brother to win. And I don't even remember if he did beat this boss. I have no clue. He may have or may have not. But I just remember cheering him on and being like, "This is for all the marbles. Like this is a if you win this, the Earth is saved." Just like trying to make up bullshit like reasons that he had to win and stuff. And And yeah, we would just be like celebrating and everything. It was an absolute blast. And I, it's a different time. You can't really go back, and there's no point in trying. But beautiful memories, beautiful.
It's almost like a sporting event or something, like cheering on your
It
teammate
was,
or something. Like make this
yeah,
bucket for Lindsay. She's your crush. She'll give you a kiss. I don't know, something like that.
yeah. It was like that. It was.
The closest I think you come nowadays, I mean, unless you do have like that more personal connection with somebody and you're playing games on the couch together, is probably like almost like streaming or like challenges, like kind of like going for speed runs or things along those lines. I see like strong like energy in those kind of communities and kind of like people in comments cheering others on. So it's not the
Hmm.
same.
Yeah,
I know that digital and in person are never going to be like identical, but I do see elements of that kind of experience,
sure.
community. Okay, well, let's get into A Link to the Past then. So when did that game come into your life and what was it like?
I can't tell you the exact year, the exact age. I want to say I was 9 or 10, which should give you an idea of how late I played that game. I believe the N64 had come out or was coming out, and I was given that game by my sister's boyfriend at the time. And I think he was just kind of unloading his collection because I think he'd upgraded to the N64. And he was like, "Hey, I got 3 games. You want them?" Those 3 games were Zelda, which we'll talk about, obviously, Donkey Kong Country, which incredible game, and then the third one I've mentioned before. I think it was Wing Commander, which is not a great game, but it is an interesting one. I think they even made a movie based off of it, which is the most bizarre thing that's probably ever happened in video game movies. But anyway, Zelda, he gave it to me, and he goes, and it just shows you again just the state of things at the time, and also really the state of Nintendo. He said, "This is Zelda. Do you know what it is?" And I said, "Not really." And he said, "It's a JRPG." No, he just said it's an RPG. He didn't say JRPG. He said it's an RPG, and that's kind of it. Like he was just like, "It's an RPG. You should play it." And I'm like, "Okay." I had no idea what RPGs were. I don't think I had played Final Fantasy 3 yet, which is 6 in Japan. But I would play it eventually, and hate it beyond description. Um, but at the time, I was playing mostly platformers. We'd get like Aladdin from Blockbuster. I think we got like a Ninja Turtle or something, or just general like like gamer games from the Super Nintendo. So the concept of an RPG was so bizarre, and the fact that it was isometric was even more bizarre. It was like, whoa! I remember that Zelda was like this. Like that was kind of like what the other one was, but it didn't look like this. Like this looks great. And then I remember me and my brother just like crouching around playing it, and it's so different back then because when you would play with your brother, uh, you would play a platformer where you could just fall in a pit and you die, and then it's like, oh, I'll pass it to my brother, he'll play. But this game, you're alive for a lot longer. Now we sucked. Like we're little kids. We're terrible at these, so we would still die, but certainly not at the rate that like a Mario you die at. You die in much longer spurts, and there's exploration. There's things you can do. So it kind of changed the way that we played games a little bit, but it didn't hurt. We just had to adapt, and I think it's still probably one of our favorite games that we played. I should talk to him about it. I don't remember. But yeah, like being introduced to it was bizarre, and I think it really got its hooks in us for probably 3-ish months of our lives. We just obsessed over it.
Wow, that's interesting. How did you then compromise on playing together?
Uh, like I think I think we took turns exploring the world. I think if I remember correctly, we would like go different places exploring the world, and then um one of us would have an idea of like what to do next because we'd always get lost. And then be like, okay, you got it. You can figure it out. And then they would try, and we would just kind of rotate back and forth that way. Um, and then the dungeons were hard for us. We were not good, so the dungeons were incredibly difficult. So those were just like stretches of how far can you get in this dungeon before you die, and then you just pass the controller over, and it's like okay. So those ones are a little more straightforward when you get once you got into the dungeon, and then the bosses were like just straight shots to see who could beat the boss first, and I remember some giving us a lot of trouble because remember we didn't know all the ins and outs of it. I think we probably had 2 bottles at the most if we were lucky, and maybe some fairies in those. I don't know if the bottles were filled, but maybe the fairies in like a bee. I mean, we didn't really understand all the mechanics of the game, so it you know when you're that dumb and young, you you just make do with what you have, and I appreciated it. It was so much fun. But yeah, we were terrible. And looking back and like playing it now, it's like we were just god awful at this game. It's not nearly as difficult, but you know we're kids.
I mean, to your credit as well, like this style of Zelda was completely different from basically any previously. I mean, there were elements of it in Zelda 2, but I mean, to play it as your first video game, like you really have to be thinking with these dungeons. They're pretty complex, especially once you get to the Dark World on. I do think though it's interesting you played on one save file as opposed to two. So I don't know. I didn't grow up with like playing Zelda with siblings. The earliest I had really managed to get somebody into a Zelda game was probably like 2009. You know, way after the fact. So to me, the series has always been more of a let's go it alone type of thing, and only with the advent of I'd say streaming really have I had more success at being more communal with it.
Yeah, by the time we got an N64, I think my brother was starting to phase out of gaming. The last games I remember us playing was Super Smash Bros, and he wasn't really even that serious about that. He would actually get mad because I just destroy him. But by the time that came out, and I even got my hands on Ocarina of Time, he was kind of out. He didn't. I don't think he's ever touched that game before. So, you know, it's all in that little time period where we played a lot of games together. And we grew apart.
Do you know how
As
far
children.
you got?
In Link to the Past?
Yeah, like can you roughly guess?
Oh, we beat it. We beat it.
Oh.
Yeah,
Did,
for it took us probably 3 months, but yeah, we beat it.
was there anything that was like really complex that you remember getting around?
Oh God, the whole game. I mean, when you're kids, you don't look at video games like so cynically as you do now. Like nowadays, I'm like, what's the coding for this? How did they code this fight? How did they code what's going on here? Like, I'll give you an example. When you first go to the Dark World and you're going to that first dungeon that's in the Dark World, you go through like a little maze that's like hidden. And when you come out, there's a monkey that follows you around. Well, as an adult, you go, oh, they're telling you that you have this monkey so that you can then use him to progress through the game. Like that's your brain. Like nowadays, our brains just know that. As a kid, me and my brother were freaking out. We were like, why is this monkey following us around? What did you do? And he's like, I didn't do anything. Like he's just there. And we're like, no. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. And so we'd go through the maze again, go all the way back. And then he's like, I don't even remember what the mechanic is. If he leaves or whatever, because you're not supposed to do that. Like, why would you do that? But, but I know we went back and we were like, okay. And then so we pulled back out up into the thing. The monkey's following us. And we're just like sitting there like, can you hit it with your sword? And we're like, no, it's not working. And like, what do you do with that guy? And then we got up and he's like, I'll open this dungeon for you for like, what was it, like 100 rupees or 10 rupees or something. And at the time, we didn't know how to farm rupees. We didn't realize how easy it was. The game like hands you rupees by the dozens. We didn't even realize it. So we were pretty poor, and we're like, well, we're gonna have to make our rupee dollars stretch. Like, I don't know if we can do this. He said, let's just do it. Let's just do it. And so we did it, and we're like, he opened the door for us. Yeah. So it's a completely different mindset when you're playing it than it is now. But it's a delight, those kinds of things to kids. And I think that's an important thing, is that, we can play Zelda as jaded adults, but it's a completely different experience when you're a kid. There's a certain whimsy to it. There was the dungeon, again in the dark world. It's in the town. It's in Kakariko Village, and you have to bomb the floor, and then it shoots light through it, and then you bring the fake girl into it, and it reveals it as a demon.
That one is that one Kakariko? Yeah, I think you're right. Is it? Yeah. The girl is like crying there's a villager that says that, or the tree says it too. She's like crying in them. Anyways.
Yeah, and so we were just completely lost for that. I don't even remember if we solved that or if her boyfriend came over one day and was like, "Oh, you gotta do this." Most of it we solved on our own. I feel like that one I remember us not, and that's disappointing because it's as an adult, just not like a lot of places to go. It's not like it's not like a huge map or something where you can't figure it out. And then I remember the bosses were always a struggle. Like we got to points like I don't know how we're gonna beat this guy. Like this guy is on like in the woods in the dark world. There was that boss that like the floor is moving and there's spikes, and he just kind of shoots stuff at you. That boss, we were probably on it for like 3 days trying to beat that guy. And then when you beat it, you're like, yeah, high five, and we do it. We're all excited. Nowadays, you can walk up and I can hit it like 5 times with a sword and it feel like it dies. But like back then, that was a huge accomplishment. So yeah, the bosses. And in the light world, it was the boss that the third one, the worm snake thing.
Oh my god!
That knocks you off the platform. We'd get almost kill him, and then he'd knock us off, and we'd get so mad. But yeah, that game was super hard for us. And then Ganon himself, that took probably a week or something, because he was so hard for us.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, and to your credit, like even today, when I play this after a while, I'm like, what do I do with this boss? Like, I mean, that moth boss, man, I think I lost a life or two there.
That's the boss, the moth one. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a thumbnail of some lady saying like playing Zelda Link to the Past for the first time, and this forest temple's kicking my ass. It's like a 25-minute video, and you can see that boss. But no, that's really an accomplishment. I mean, growing up with my first Zelda games, I didn't beat them. They were maybe with the exception of like Oracle of Ages, which I think was maybe more approachable. I was maybe more used to it by then. But like Ocarina of Time, like some of those puzzles were so difficult and complex. I think this one is mostly straightforward, and it's good that you had someone in your corner, like 2 people actually. You were playing alongside one, so you were communicating about the stuff, and then the other is kind of having like a older guide who had previously played it and given you the cartridge. So kind of goes back to the spirit of Zelda.
I agree. Yeah, it was weird. It was like the spirit of Zelda, except it's like condensed into my room. It was like he would come in and pop in just to see what's up, and then it'd be like, "Hey, how do you get past this guy?" He's like, "Put him in the light." And then I'd have my brother right next to me, and yeah, we just have little powwows. Like, okay, we just upgraded our sword. Did you know we could do that? He's like, I had no clue. Like, this is insane.
That's great. So let's kind of move to more present day. Since playing it back then, what has your relationship with Link to the Past been like, and how have your thoughts evolved or changed or stayed the same over time?
Certainly there's nostalgia in the game. Graphically, I think the game is maybe one of the better looking games on the Super Nintendo. they were smart to pick a very clean art style. I think it's held up. I think they took that in. Maybe it might even be an inspiration for the Wind Waker. Of just like everyone likes how this game looks on the Super Nintendo, and it's not pushing realism. It's pushing more of a pastel, more of a bright color palette. And then when they go to like the dark world, it has a darker tone to it that is easy to convey, and there's an easy distinction between them. So I think in the graphics department, it holds up beautifully. With some weird touches, pink hair. I don't know what that's about. But other than that, I mean, it looks really good. I think it defined Zelda for probably longer than it should have. um, I think it still follows somewhat of the path of the first game, but it added a lot to it where it is kind of its own deal, where it starts you off in 3 dungeons. So it'll put you in those 3 first dungeons, teach you the ropes, specifically the first dungeon, and then they get progressively harder, but they're still not very hard. To a point where you think that the adventure is over. And then it thens the twist. And that part is where the game really begins. And now you're to embark on the rest of your journey with a much harder quest and a much more satisfying conclusion. And that's really been Zelda up until I guess Breath of the Wild. I'm sure there's been a couple that have detoured from that a little bit, but that's really just been the point of the series for forever. I mean, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, maybe a little different, but still had that same sort of feel to it. Twilight Princess was like that. I didn't play Skyward Sword. Probably not gonna. I don't know on that one. Jury's out. But yeah, it has, and even the pseudo sequel, A Link Between Worlds, still followed that formula, which I guess it should because it's almost like a remake, but like not. I don't know. It's a weird one. Good game. Good game. Up until about probably Breath of the Wild, where they decided we're done with that and we're going to go a completely different route, which I would argue probably harkens back to the first game in some ways. And in other ways, it takes from modern open world RPG. But yeah, I think Link to the Past was really like a staple that they didn't want to let go of, for better or for worse. Probably for better. Ocarina of Time was great.
This rated the highest Zelda game even by popular polls today. That tops out Breath of the Wild. I was shocked by that.
Ocarina of Time does?
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's Ocarina of Time is. I mean, this is not the Ocarina of Time podcast, but that is probably the best game ever made. Maybe one of, at least one of.
Yeah. If you know, you know, and if you don't, then you'll never agree. That's fine. People will believe what they want to believe. But let's stick with
doesn't have to be your favorite. And that's what I always say about these things. I always and you know me, I always try to separate what my personal preference from what I think is, you know, and like we'll talk about Link to the Past today, and I have my own opinions on it and modern lens playthrough ideas of it, but I also don't disregard what it is, and I think that's important.
Right. I mean, you and me both are Dragon Quest fans, you know, like we've gone back through the archives of like what is the earliest RPGs. And you know, I think you were saying earlier about how like future Zeldas would emulate this idea of like you being the hero in a sense and going on a heroic journey and it getting harder by the end. That has to come with the territory in a game where you constantly level up heart pieces, equipment, and your sword and your armor. So, you know, it did start here somewhat, but I think it starts also in NES Zelda in ways that I do think you alluded to. Somewhat, I really don't think you can do a lot of those harder ones without having done the proper grinding.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So do you like it today?
It's not a game that I would play. I'll put it
Just for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, if I got a reason to play it, sure. Like, why not? It's not a bad game by any stretch. It's a good game. But I think what I like about Zelda gets a little bit lost in it. I think A Link to the Past represents a Zelda that's really got its grips on exploration. Like that, the whole point of that game is to explore, to go out into the world, find ways to get deeper into it. Even its dungeons, I don't really feel have difficult puzzles to them. They're really just more exploration based dungeons. There's very very few times you even have the ability to get stuck in a dungeon in Link to the Past. It's a lot of there's one way forward and I just got a new item. So it's probably going to be that. And it's probably not going to be that complicated. Like it's very simple. You get a hook shot, go to that place where there's things you can hook shot. Did you get a boomerang or a bow? I can't. Yeah, boomerang was not even in a dungeon. I mean, it kind of was.
No,
But,
in the first one it was.
well, if you count that, I guess
yeah.
if you count the castle. Um, but yeah, you get an item and it's pretty clear where to use it. It's not very hard. I don't even remember getting that stuck on puzzles as a kid.
Right.
Just frustrated at how difficult it was for me. So yeah, the game itself is more of a combination of combat and specifically exploration. Whereas I really, really like it when the game challenges you with puzzles. And I think after this game, they start throwing more complex puzzles at you, both in the 3D versions and in the isometric versions. And I appreciate that. I like being challenged with puzzles. It can even be a block puzzle. I don't care. I love block puzzles. I think they're fun. But I like it when it's a combination of the exploration with the puzzles that I think Ocarina of Time really nailed in like a really big way. And I just don't think A Link to the Past did it. And I don't think that's its fault. I just don't think that was the intention. I think the intention was let's make an exploration based game where you kind of grow with your character. And I think to that end it succeeds. But I don't know if that's what I love.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, I kind of agree. Like, I do think that future iterations handle puzzles in dungeons better. Like, I think that's granted. I do think, though, like, to give this, it's almost necessary to give the game some grace, simply for it being the first of its kind to really offer puzzles in dungeons at all. You know, I mean, I know you don't know Zelda 2 as well. That game, like, you could barely consider anything in there puzzle, and Zelda 1 is primarily combat. This game is definitely combat centric. Like there's an emphasis on fighting well. But I do think too, like in terms of like it is an exploration like puzzle, hunting down the small keys. Where haven't I looked? What would make one appear? And then how do I use my items in order to facilitate that puzzle process? Yeah, there's some like combination of like hook shots and stuff, but I also think of like those stars on the ground. That doesn't really have much to do with an item that you get. In a couple of those dungeons, the items aren't even used or necessary. You can walk out of several of them without getting one. Some of them, too, I wasn't able to figure out. Like the shield, like on my own. Like if you hold the sword at full charge, your shield will go sideways for the reflect portion. So like there's that part where they're firing beams at you. Never figured that out.
I'm sorry, I never figured that out either. That's funny. I just ran in and took the hit.
Yeah, I always took the hit. But
that's funny. Yeah, that's cool.
So there's still stuff I'm learning about it today. So I don't know. I understand your perspective. I agree, and I'm looking forward to doing some more of the top-down ones and seeing kind of the evolution of them from here on out. But compared to the early ones, like this is leagues above in terms of like a complex gameplay system. So I mean, I'm coming off of that angle too.
Yeah, I agree, and that's one of the reasons I don't really go back much, because I what I like is more of a puzzle combination. Like I like all the parts of it, but I think puzzles should be more of it. And Zelda: Link to the Past is probably not enough. And I know that the first Zelda, and because I played it now, is almost none. And I don't even want to touch Adventure of Link. If you love it, that's great. But side scroller action games, just like not my jam. We were trying to play Castlevania and it just did not work out. I freaking hated it. And then it's not a shot to the game. I have full respect for it, but yeah, I just don't. It's not really my thing. But one thing I will say is that I think Zelda, A Link to the Past, made the exploration, made the puzzles, and even you could argue made the combat more of a game than the first Zelda. And if you remember, like the first Zelda, it was Zelda and Mario. Like that's all. That's all the Nintendo really had. Was it had a Zelda game and it had a Mario game. Mario was supposed to be left to right, jumping. Zelda had no jumping, and it was top down. You could argue open world, and I'm willing to make that argument that it's open world. So two completely different games, and they had zero idea of how to make them work. And I think that's part of the fun, is that this is where a lot of those games started. They weren't arcade games. Like obviously there were games before it, but most of that was arcade stuff. It's a completely different mindset to then say, how about no incentive to quarters, just play as long as you can. Now, how do we make this worth your time and worth your, more importantly, worth your money? And that's when you had all these ideas of how to make this game. Now, Zelda, the first one, has, to me, a lot of mindless exploration that you just have to, either you hear it from your friend or you you play for 20 hours and then make one little increment of progress in that game. Whereas I think as they got to the Super Nintendo era, they must have looked back at that and realized, hey, we can't present this, especially because those gamers are getting older, and they may not have as much time. Where they were in grade school at the time, they might be in high school by now. They might be graduating high school, maybe, or they might be, getting into high school. But the point is, gaming had to change a little bit, and now you have to say, okay, instead of there's a the most egregious one to me is there's a lake in the middle of the forest, and if you put a thing of meat and then blow a flute, I think that's what it was. The creature will come out, something like that. Instead of that, they had to find ways to actually clue you in on how to do that, and that's where the game part comes in, where it's not just a big guessing roulette of like, what do I do? They actually try to make clues in the world and give you context clues, try to point you in what it is. And I think that makes the game feel a lot more fair than classic Zelda, and a lot more to me. And this is more to me, but satisfying, because it is kind of satisfying in like an old Zelda game when you get through something that seemed hard or you couldn't figure it out. But to me, it never quite tells you what to do, and it never quite hints at it. There are sorcerers throughout the world that will, inadvertently tell you like something that you may need 20 hours later. But to me, that's not quite enough, and I think they realized that wasn't enough. And for that reason, I like what they did with this, where you can still beat it without having to go to your friends or looking up a clue. It always feels doable.
Right. Yeah, this is like the step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I agree there. So the public perception views this game very positively, although I have seen some ebbs and flows about where people stand on it. But let's just go with the time. I like Famitsu. You like Famitsu. Kind of as a metric as what is Japan thinking of the game at the time. I see the cringe face already. I guess we could talk about it. Well, they, at that time, had scores of 10, 10, 10, and 9, making this the highest rated game of its time at a 39. And I've also heard many call this game a masterpiece, and also kind of the pillar of the series in a sense. Where do you stand on whether or not Zelda: A Link to the Past is as perfect as it's made out to be?
Famitsu, for one, has some very controversial decisions. I do not love Famitsu. Um, I question a lot of what they've done. Some of it I let go because of time. It's like, okay, if you're gonna rate Dragon Quest 2 Giga High, I have to kind of think about what games were out, and maybe there weren't a lot of great games at the time. So you can take that for what it will. But I do know that they rated Chrono Cross incredibly high, and I don't see it. So I don't know. I do question Famitsu. But if we're talking about A Link to the Past, um, the game is a classic. It's an important game. Like we said earlier, it shaped Zelda for 20 years, probably longer, however long it's been. Um, it defined a genre almost. I mean, Zelda's almost a genre at this point. Um, it's an important game. Uh, is it perfect? That is a hard question. I'm not as strict on the concept of perfection that other people are. Because like I know some people will say like nothing can be perfect because you can always theoretically make it better or it in time it becomes less than. But I don't really subscribe to that. I like to think of perfection as with the tools they had at the time, the knowledge that they had at the time, could they have done it any better? I would argue no. I think it is a perfect game. For what it is. You know, a football game can be a perfect game for what it is. A first person shooter can be a perfect game for what it is. And I think A Link to the Past is probably a perfect game. Is it my perfect game? Definitely not. It's not. It's not a game that I would go back to and herald as um my favorite or God probably even top 3 Zelda games. I don't even know if I'd put it that high. But this is the third Zelda game. All of my favorite Zelda games came way after, or just slightly, but it came after this game. So it's like it's not fair to be like, well, Link to the Past is good, but like Minish Cap you can get really small and it has better graphics, and like that's nonsense. It that game came out over 10 years later, or whatever, however 15 years later. It's not fair. So when you look at it, it's the third Zelda game. Super Nintendo was still pretty early. It was 92, right? 93, 92?
Yeah, this one maybe is 91 though.
91. Okay. Yeah, really, really early in the Super Nintendo library, within a year for sure. So they were working on it before the Super Nintendo was even released. They're trying to get as much as they can from this series, and I'm impressed. I think it holds up well today. Like you can still play it and it's fun. That alone is an accomplishment, especially considering all the other options you have. I think it's a very important game. I think it's perfect. It's not one that I would generally play. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, it's perfect for its time, like you said.
Yeah,
So.
sure.
I want to do a bit of comparison. Actually, let me come back to that. Because I do want to talk about we kind of talked about it, but I guess in recent playthrough, were there any parts that were particularly memorable or highlights for you?
Yeah. There was something I remember even exclaiming about when I was playing it. I was like, "What?" And it's not coming to me right now. Some of the things that I really liked. One thing that really hit me was the amount of heart pieces you could get just trotting along your path. I think I ended the game with only needing to fill 2 more containers. And I really tried to play the game without I tried to look at it with lenses that hadn't played it before. Of just like I know that I can go that way, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to follow what I think the path is supposed to be and just play it normally. And I didn't want to be like, well, I happen to know that this you can get this item there, which will help this later. So I didn't. I just kind of played and let the game guide me. And I got a lot of heart pieces, and I was surprised by how many I got. I don't know if I got that many as a kid. I probably didn't. But nowadays, with just the clues that the game gave me, I was able to do pretty well in terms of heart pieces. I think they're a little more stingy on them later in the series, but here they're pretty forgiving. Um, I was blown away by the graphics at times. I forgot how beautiful the bosses are. I'm thinking of the moth is really, there's a lot going on in that fight. Um, the scorpion in that first dungeon in the dark world, when you're chipping away at his like mask, that's some pretty advanced looking graphics. Like it looks really cool, and him like shooting his tail out, a little bit arcadey, but it's impressive nonetheless. There's a lot of cool effects in the game. My I'm playing it, and my girlfriend said, "Whatever you're playing, it has really good music." So, so for whatever that's worth, there you go. It has. I think people do like the soundtrack to it. It's certainly in my head all the time, but I don't obsess about music, especially from video games. But as a kid, I heard that overworld theme quite a bit, so that's part of my childhood. Little touches in it. When you're getting the master sword, you're walking up through, and first of all, going through the woods, you find a bunch of fake swords, which is kind of funny. I don't know whose idea that was, obviously, because I didn't make the game, but that's a funny idea. I remember as a kid, I was constantly fooled. I was like, I think I got it, and it's like, no, sorry, bro. But then when you finally go through it, you're walking through this forest, little like outcrop in the forest, and there's all these animals that just like run by you. What an interesting touch. Doesn't really happen in the game besides that, but really fascinating touch right there, and it makes it feel so memorable and so. I don't remember other Master Sword moments feeling like that, where it was just so momentous. Um, and then I'll end with uh the little story, because we love Dragon Quest, and I love the little stories that series tells. And I don't really think of Zelda as a game that tells those kinds of stories. Most of those are like, I dropped my ball in that dungeon. Can you go get it? And then that spurs you to do the dungeon. But there is a little story in it that's very moving. It's the boy with the flute in the little forest area, and there's the animals that like to listen to him play the flute. And you come to him. How does it go? You find him in the dark world, and he's like deformed, and and if you're in the light world, if you approach him, he plays and then he disappears. And then if you find him in the dark world, you get to approach him, and he's like, "Find my flute, please. Just keep the music going." And I think that's such a moving, like it's such a small piece of it, and it doesn't really impact the world much, except that you get a flute out of it. But it's somebody put thought into that, and I was impressed by that. It was like they didn't have to do that, but it's a really moving scene, and he just turns to a tree, right? Like as soon after you do that, he just like fades into a tree. What a beautiful, like, it's kind of heartbreaking, but it's like he's passing on the music to you, which is cool. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, the narrative components here are just super strong. There's so many things like that. Then going and finding his father in the bar and then playing the flute, and he's like, "Oh, I got to hear my son play one last time," and then he falls back asleep. I don't know. It's very charming. I really like that, enchanting almost at times, and like I found it so captivating. Even just booting this game up, I had my Switch playing, and I had my over the top headphones going, and I couldn't. I was blown away by sound effects and visual effects. It's raining outside, just the ambiance of da 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 da. It really is strong and striking. Your uncle's going in, sword in hand. Is he Link? What's going on here? And, I don't know. I do really appreciate the attempts at storytelling here. I think they are well done. And even just within the framework of like the overall narrative, I mean, I don't really do a great job of following it. Of like, the seven maidens are opening up or protecting the seal, and Ganon has kidnapped them, so they can't protect the seal anymore. But that each one is kind of a story. I think is pretty interesting. Zelda being kind of like the head maiden, and even just interacting with Zelda in the beginning in the sewers and the castle, and helping her escape, and then she's surviving most of it. It's not a helpless Zelda thing for the entirety of the game. For like the beginning opening of the game, she's like with the elder, and then Ganon kidnaps her. So I really appreciate like some of those stories as well. Were you able to think of what the moment where you were like at your screen was? Nah, that's all right.
No, it may have been one of those, but
Maybe the moth.
I feel like it was something else. I
Was it
think one thing I was surprised by how early you could get the ice rod. That was kind of I never used to get it that early, and I didn't want to, but then I talked to some Sahasrara, that guy. He he mentions after you leave like the first dungeon, if you go and talk to him, because I was like, oh, what does this guy have to say? Now that I got this stuff, because he tells you about there, he gives you the boots, or I think, um, and then you talk to him, and then he's like, by the way, there's like an ice rod in the bottom corner or in the southeast part of the map. He just kind of tells you that, and I just in my head I was like, I don't think I ever picked up on that as a kid, or even last time I played it, and I was like, let's just go do it. And sure enough, you can get the ice rod like really early, and then never use it until like one boss fight.
There's a trick to that. Apparently, if you freeze enemies and then hit them with the hammer, it will restore your magic.
I didn't know that. That's a really cool interaction.
I didn't get to try it, but that's what I was being told. So, yeah. I don't use the ice rod either. I just use it for that one boss.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite item?
Hook shot, baby. Oh my god. I love hook shots in Zelda, just any of them. And in this one, it's dude. I go around that world and I hook shot everything. Enemies, little like posts. I'm zipping around. That's how I play that game. Doing that and then running with those boots. It's just like a combination. I almost played a little bit like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, where like there's like parts of the map that have like a diagonal surface, and I'm like, I wonder if I can get all the way through from one end of this, map to the other just by running. And so I like aim it so where like I'll go like this, and then it'll like push me down a slant. But as long as I don't hit a straight, flush area, I'm okay. And so I try to see if I can get all the way through. It's just I love zipping around in that game. But for far as items go, hookshot is phenomenal.
Yeah, dude, that was a boon in the Ice Palace as well, because you can, you're slipping around, and then it lets you hook onto blocks, and then those penguins are one-shot kills for them. The jellyfish, if you use the hook shot on the jellyfish, that turn into electric. I'm always swinging at them with my sword, and then I get electrocuted. But the hook shot is really the way to do it.
Yep.
Mine was the bow, and specifically why I really liked it this playthrough was because there's that fairy fountain where you throw rupees in, and I basically I maxed out the bow as much as I needed to, and I just used it as like a secondary attack for a lot of the game.
It's a strong weapon.
It's fun too because you got to be
did
skilled
not
at like
short
aiming
change
it.
that bow.
You can use it on a lot of bosses, so I had a good time bowing it up.
I couldn't remember how to do them. So I decided if I can't remember and I can't figure it out, I'm not going to do it. And the two that I didn't get were the enhanced boomerang. Couldn't remember, so I just decided no. And then the cape that makes you invisible and invulnerable,
Yeah.
right? I think. Yeah, I couldn't remember it. I saw where I could use them, but I was like, if I can't figure it out, I'm just not going to do it. So I didn't. I'm sure if I played a little longer, I could figure it out. But
there's a cane as well, a blue cane.
There is a blue cane, isn't there?
I don't know what that
Yeah, I
does. I
think
heard
you're
about it
right.
though.
I know I've played games where I played ones where I 100% of that. So I'm sure I would have known it, but you're right. There is a blue cane. Huh. I completely forgot about whatever that blue cane is.
Yeah, I don't think I've gotten the blue cane or the cape, but I don't know if it was like a jumping cape. Maybe I'd be more interested. But by that point in the game, I'm kind of just like, all right, let's get to Ganon. But maybe 100%ing would be a fun endeavor. We can now get to some more of the compare contrast. I have one comparison that I specifically want to do, and then if you have ones that you'd like to do, I'm totally open to it. But seeing as how this is a top-down Zelda game, 2D, and they have done several since then, and the original also counts as it. How do you think A Link to the Past compares to the rest of the top-down 2D entries? And I can just kind of go over them, what they are. We have NES Zelda. We have A Link to the Past. We have Link's Awakening. We have Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, The Minish Cap, Four Swords Adventure, and A Link Between Worlds.
Mm, I think A Link to the Past is probably the best of all of them. Um, I do not like Link's Awakening. Uh, kind of despise it. uh, I think the runner-up on these would have to be the Capcom outings. Link Between Worlds is good, and again, I like it, and I 100%ed it, which is I don't 100% games, so that should tell you something. But it's kind of easy to 100%, and Link Between Worlds, I don't like the item thing. I think it ruins the dungeons a little bit. But otherwise, it's a cool game. But I think the Capcom outings are really interesting, and they have a lot of surprising amount of charm to them. So it's hard to put them above A Link to the Past or below. Personally, my favorite Zelda game is Minish Cap. That's one of the Capcom ones. But it is what it is. It's a portable game. It's not meant to be very long, and it's not meant to be very hard. Um, the Oracle games have a lot of meat to them, which I think is important. I don't love the graphics on them, and I think some of it strays a little far from Zelda style, but they're still really good games. There's a lot to them, and the puzzles in the dungeons are really fun. It's a fun game. But I think Zelda Link to the Past, its graphics are really legendary. It kind of has its own style, which is weird because like everyone thinks about the style of like NES Zelda, and they don't really think about Adventures of Link or whatever. But they think about the original Zelda, and it has like that's kind of an iconic look. And then you have Ocarina of Time. That Link is iconic. Like that's the one that people draw. That's the one that is like the 3D guy. And then you have the Wind Waker, which is the cartoon direction that took off for some of the games you mentioned, including Minish Cap, which I like. But the Zelda a Link to the Past has like a very different look to it. He's like a chubby little kid. Seems chubby. Portly. He's got pink hair for some reason, but in the art he doesn't that I've seen. I don't really understand what happened there. Maybe it was done because of like contrast in like skin or something. I don't really know. Um, I think at one point I did know.
It's a
And I
cap
think
versus
it
the
was
bottom of
something
the
to do with
cap or
that.
something.
Oh, is it?
I'm not
It's not
sure.
his hair. Either way, it looks odd. But the game has its own style, and I think for that reason, it kind of stands on its own in that like classic 2D top down style. So it's hard for me to put one of the other ones above it because I almost feel like they always end up feeling like they copied off something. Whereas A Link to the Past is really just its own beast. hard to say anything is more impactful than A Link to the Past when it comes to Zelda games. I don't really think anything was.
Top down or all together?
Top down.
Okay.
I think we have a couple pillars here. Like Zelda, well, Zelda 1 will always get, credit for starting the genre. Okay, whatever. I don't hold that as a high opinion as other people do, but some people, like, you'll say, "Wait, what was the best of this series?" And they'll say it's the first one because there wouldn't be the other ones without it. I think that's kind of a cop out answer, but I'll give Zelda its credit. The first one, it started that whole thing. Great. Zelda Link to the Past, I think, is an important 2D one that added a lot of structure to Zelda, 3D or 2D. Ocarina of Time, one of the, like, how to make a adventure game in 3D. That's how you do it. And then I think Breath of the Wild, and how to reinvent a series, how to combine things from the old in with the new, and how to give you a sense of freedom that I think Zelda was actually meant to have. That really, probably because of A Link to the Past, never really got a chance to show. Again, and I've said it before, for better or for worse, everyone's got their opinion on that, and that is what it is. But I do think those four games all stand up for something for Zelda.
Yeah. One of the big four. Do you? I don't know. Do you want to go into that comparison, or do you have another one in mind?
Which comparison?
Like, just as far as like the most impactful Zeldas, since we're already kind of talking about it.
Sure. The most impactful Zeldas were probably Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild being a modern impact. I think that got a lot of people that kind of were out of Zelda back in. I happen to know a couple people where that's their story, because they were able to take the concepts of Zelda that we liked and then meld it with this more adult, more respectful of your time, ironically, even though it's wide open, more open world approach that I think gaming wants to go in. And I really do think that Breath of the Wild represents closer to the original style or original vision of what Zelda was supposed to be. Whereas I think A Link to the Past, while it at the time probably seemed pretty open world and pretty free, it's actually very linear, as most Zelda games are. They're really good, especially Ocarina of Time, really good at masking just how linear they are. And that's to their credit, because they both of those games feel very open and feel like, wow, I could do anything. But really, you can kind of just do one thing. And they give you a little bit of freedom. Like, you can do like you can maybe do this dungeon before this dungeon. A little bit. But it's not to the extent that Breath of the Wild did it. And I think the original Zelda even had a little bit more freedom. Maybe not so much, but I think that was kind of the goal, was to be not linear. And I think Breath of the Wild finally figured that out.
Well, in what respect then do you think that Link to the Past is impactful within the series or outside of?
Well, again, I think Link to the Past had the structure of what Zelda would be for like 20 something years. I think they've really just followed that. And Ocarina of Time didn't waver from that at all. It's really almost just like, in some ways, like a retelling of A Link to the Past, but in 3D. And a lot of them kept going with that. I think it also set the standard that 2D Zeldas, for whatever reason, are just cartoon games. Maybe because A Link to the Past was so beautiful, and it was in the Super Nintendo, so it couldn't be that crazy. But for whatever reason, all of the 2D ones are like cartoonish. They don't have to be. They certainly don't have to be. But like, if you look at even now the new Zelda one, what's it called? Zelda
Echoes
um,
of Awakening or something.
Echoes of Wisdom, right?
Wisdom, yeah.
Because she's the Triforce of Wisdom.
Right.
Um, Even that one is very cartoonish. They clearly have a 3D version that they could do, a great 3D graphics, but it's very, very cartoonish. And that might be due to A Link to the Past. I think people just like looking at that game, and so that's just what 2D Zelda is.
Do you have examples of like top-down 2D that aren't in this style? I don't. I think top-down may be too
Sure.
obscure, but like, I mean, if you have them.
Yeah, I mean, Baldur's Gate is top down, the newest one, and even the older ones. Like a lot of like Americanized RPGs, always tried to have a realistic style to them. So I'm talking Diablo, um, original Baldur's Gate CRPGs, Planescape Torment, Fallouts, the originals.
How would Zelda
all those
implement
games,
that kind of art style?
I can't even tell you. It's never been done. It would be weird now thinking about a Zelda that's 2D, that's
Yeah.
realistic. It would just be odd. I don't I can't even picture it. Nintendo did a good job. I can't even do it.
I'm trying
to picture what that would even look
Diablo.
like.
Like it's not happening.
I mean, it could like, but I just can't see it. My brain will not do it.
Well,
But no, like there's plenty of examples of it, but they've gone that way with 2D Zeldas, and I don't know. It's a brand.
I mean, just what realistic style, like art styles, does Nintendo do for, like, or like kind of more rough or rugged for any of their franchises?
Metroid's very dark.
Yeah,
F-Zero,
kind of.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
I'd
say that's
they
still
don't do that anymore.
though, even for its
I mean,
time.
yeah, it's got some, but like I'm thinking more like GameCube. Those are pretty realistic and explosive. Let's see. Well, I mean, Zelda that isn't 3D Zeldas are all a lot more gritty, realistic. They're bright, but they're certainly realistic. Mario has always been really cartoony. You could maybe say Star Fox, although that's
Maybe.
kind of its own.
I might give the
Own
pass to
beast.
Fire Emblem, but it's going more like anime style. Like I don't know.
Don't get me started on Fire Emblem.
Eh,
Anime tickle your character game. But yeah, no, they've done it. They've done it. Splatoon, I guess, is pretty cartoony. I'm trying to think. Kirby was surprisingly realistic. That newest one, the Forgotten Lands, that was like a good-looking game. I was kind of surprised by that.
you say that wasn't
Yeah,
cartoony?
they could certainly do it. It had elements of it that weren't that cartoony. I mean, obviously the character, like a lot of the enemies were very cartoony looking, but
Right.
the environments were really rich
Mm.
and detailed. Like they weren't really cartoony environments. They were very pretty. So I give them some credit there, but they have some. I mean, including other Zeldas. So
Okay.
they could. They don't,
something to
but
think
they
about.
could. And
Yeah.
I couldn't really see it any other way.
Do you recommend Link to the Past to newcomers, younger generations, any type of newcomers?
Yeah, I would recommend it for somebody that is intimidated by puzzles. I think it's a really good game that you're not gonna get stuck on very often. You might occasionally, and that's kind of the fun of Zelda. But it's certainly not a complex game. So you could give this to a kid and nudge them throughout the world, and I think it would be a fun experience for them. For people that are a little bit older, I just don't think they're going to get the satisfaction out of it that they would other recommendations. Ocarina of Time, if they can get a good way to play it, I'm sure Nintendo will come up with something on that. Is it on the Switch thing?
for $80
It is,
a
right?
year.
For $80 a year, play Zelda.
Yeah.
They got to find a better way to do that. Maybe that way, but Ocarina of Time I think is a great one to play just always. Breath of the Wild is a good way to start. As far as 2D Zeldas go, I don't know. I think there's just might be better series out there than Zelda. Um, but for people that are a little younger and that would struggle with puzzles, this is not a bad game to play, and it's realistically pretty short. It's not very long, so
Awesome. Yeah. Agreed.
good.
Well, you took the record. This is the longest interview we've had.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I talk too much?
No, you're welcome. This is exactly what we wanted. We'll let the viewers be the deciders.
Okay.
I'm always down to talk, though. But Spencer, any final thoughts on Link to the Past?
It's an important game from my childhood. It holds a lot of nostalgia, but I like to separate that and really look at it objectively. And it's an important game, but I think Zelda, because of it, has gotten a lot better.
Nice. Yeah. It's almost like that stepping stone, or the first, the one to like set the court in motion. It's the first boyfriend.
I
want to say
suppose.
girlfriend, but well, Zelda is the first girlfriend, I guess.
There you go. Yeah.
Maybe not the first girl. Maybe the first good girlfriend.
First girlfriend that treated you right.
Yeah, there we go.
Then you know what. Then you know what you like. You know you're good.
There's our title.
There you go.
All right, well, viewers at home, go check out Spencer over on RPG Archive. And I don't really have any like awesome, fun Link to the Past style closer questions, but I was hoping you could give us your best Link to close us out. So Spencer, as Link, the mighty hero of time, close us out.
Like with a Link quote?
An epic Link quote. Yeah. If you were Link, how would you close off this interview? Okay, there it is.